Hello and welcome to Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandel. Negotiation is described as an art, whether it's a parent and child, teacher and student, employer and employee, or husband and wife. We as humans negotiate throughout our lives. Each side hopes to make minimal concessions on their path to achieving what they want. And finding common ground is seen as a win-win outcome. The masterful negotiators appear to achieve the most, but as a society, has relying upon the art of negotiation caused us to impede our quest to progress? Tonight's guest sees the process and purpose of negotiation in a different light. Bernie Mayer and co-author Jacqueline Font-Guzman have written The Neutrality Trap: Disrupting and Connecting for Social Change. Their book discusses how conflict resolution tools can be used to affect social change, but there also needs to be disruption and disorder. They illustrate the polarization in today's society and how a negotiator's neutral stance could be counterproductive to achieving social justice reform and may even perpetuate oppression and environmental challenges. In this episode of Scribes and Songsters, we'll find out from Bernie why he thinks society may have been using negotiation to reach solutions prematurely before addressing its underlying problems. And we'll discuss whether there should be a completely different tack taken that would ultimately help achieve a better future. Welcome to Scribes and Songsters, Bernie.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
So first of all, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I started out as in this kind of work about 40 years ago as a partner in a mediation and conflict intervention firm centered in Boulder, Colorado, but working all over the world called CDR Associates. And about 15 years ago, I took a position as a professor of conflict studies at Creighton University in the United States. Well, I did it while I was living here. And I always said I did that because I couldn't stand the words billable hours anymore. And I continued to work as a mediator and a facilitator and a consultant about conflict and trainer. But that also gave me some chance to step back and reflect in a different kind of way on what I had been doing for all those years. And I moved here to Kingsville about 18 years ago.
Do you enjoy living on this side of the border?
I do very much. I do.
Tell us a little bit about your co-author, Jacqueline.
Jackie and I have been long-term colleagues. We started at Creighton University the same week, and she worked there until about a year ago. She is a lawyer by training originally, but also a mediator and a conflict intervener, and is now the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Eastern Mennonite University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And she grew up and still has family and strong ties to Puerto Rico.
So now you've written this book together. Did you do it virtually or did you get together?
We did it virtually. There was a lot of virtual, but we since we both conceptualized the idea and agreed to work together on it, which was about a year and a half ago, a little more, until today, we still haven't been together. Although I am going to travel to Harrisonburg in June, and we're going to do a 5-day intensive workshop based on this.
So what was that process like? Because, you know, I've written with colleagues when we've been writing documentaries and things like that. And it's a very sort of hands-on sort of operation. But what was the process like doing it virtually?
Well, I thought you could ask what it was like to be a co-author, but the two go together.
Yes.
I have written a number of books before this, always alone. And I thought that I wasn't really quite built to be a co-author. I didn't play in that particular sandbox very well. But this particular book really required, I think, people approaching it from diverse backgrounds. Because a lot of it deals with social problems like misogyny and racism, for example, and how you make progress on those. And I thought it was really important to have diversity of background and experience and positioning in terms of those issues. And Jackie and I had worked together extremely closely, had done workshops together, and had taught together. And so it was kind of a natural fit. Working virtually has this advantage. You can meet much more spontaneously. Now, if we were in the same office, we would do that, but we never were. I always lived in a different area. So we could just meet when we felt we had to. We could use Google Docs or some other program to have the script up there. It worked very well. I would have rather have been able to have some direct contact with her. I think that would have been better. But given the realities that we face at this last 2 years, it really wasn't an option.
Did you agree on everything that was going in the book?
We agreed on the actual fundamental ideas and substance and examples. We had a slightly different take on some of it, which we tried to explore with dialogues between us in it. But it wasn't like we saw things in a very, very different way, but we have very different experiences. And so, for example, I found that I learned a lot from hearing how she understood issues that I thought I understood pretty well, but from a background of somebody who was Puerto Rican. For example, I have spent a good part of my life, not only as a mediator, but as a social activist working on issues of racism. And she very much has fought against racism too, but understands it as a subset of colonialism. That if you don't understand the colonial basis of racism, you're not completely understanding it. And that was a very different and valuable vantage point for me to have. So it wasn't like a disagreement, but it was coming at it from two different angles.
Did you edit each other's work?
Yeah, very much so.
Was that painful or productive?
Well, there probably were painful moments because we occasionally had to tell each other that a good section that they wrote had to be tossed.
It's always difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, or that when they thought they were really being eloquent and clear, they were not. But that's what I always have relied on good editors for that, including my wife, Julie McFarland, who you've interviewed previously.
Yes, indeed. Now, your book is called The Neutrality Trap. And why do you feel that remaining neutral might be wrong?
Well, I think neutrality is a kind of messed up concept. It means something different to everybody. I think in journalism, it has some real problems as well, by the way. But it means, are you unbiased? Do you have no real previous relationship with people? Do you have a axe to grind in the situation? Do you like one side? Can you remain equidistant? It means a lot of different things, and it's not really deliverable. I don't think we are able to be truly neutral in the sense that we don't have opinions about something. We don't care one way or another. We may not have a differential liking for people. Plus, we have values, and it's not like those are problems. We don't need to suppress our values. They empower us. But we have values that also about wanting to give people a voice, wanting to help people work out their own problems to the extent possible, making sure nobody is run over in a process because they are less powerful or less able to articulate their needs or more vulnerable. And that's everything that the strict concept of neutrality is not. Now, I know there's another element of this that was particularly relevant to this, which is why the subtitle of this book is Disrupting and Connecting. The immediate impetus to write this, although I'd been thinking about something like this for quite a while, was the aftermath of when George Floyd was murdered in Minnesota. And there was quite a reaction, and there was a bunch of demands that we have to relook at the relationship between police and communities. There were people demonstrating. Some of it was pretty uncontained, and there were, got at times a little out of hand, but not terribly so.
Well, there were some pretty violent situations.
There was some minor looting and a couple of little fires, but quickly put out. It was nothing like I think we were left with the impression of. The vast majority of the demonstrations, as I understand it, were angry, and there was a lot of anger expressed, but they were not violent. But there was some. There was some violence around the edges of developing the union movement in our history, and the anti-war movement, and the civil rights movement. There was violence around the edges too. And those are unfortunate if people or property get hurt. Very unfortunate, but they weren't the bulk of what was happening. And what we responded to, many people responded to, many people in my field of conflict intervention responded to, was saying, what we really need to do is bring the police and the community together to talk. And what we really need to bring is to bring different sides together to talk. And I'm not against that. I spend a lot of time helping make those kind of conversations be useful. But we needed more than that. We needed a movement for change. The civil rights did not get achieved merely by people talking. It got achieved by people being out in the streets, sitting in, disrupting systems, demanding change. And also there were conversations that were important as well. And so that's the other problem with neutrality, I think, is that it suggests, come on, people, now smile on your brother. Everybody get together, got to love one another right now. I know I'm showing my age. And all will be well, or all we are saying is give peace a chance. And that never, ever quite sat right with me, because I want peace, and I want people to learn to get along, but we also need to understand the importance of social movements.
Do you feel that we've not come far enough so that we don't need to have a big upheaval?
I'd like to think that, but no, I don't think on the major social issues that confront us, and often in issues like sexual harassment in the workplace, or bullying, or violence in families and domestic violence. No, I don't think we've come far enough that we can just rely on our ability to come together. We have made progress.
And with the Weinstein, it was people coming forward and telling their stories, and where the likes of Weinstein and others of his ilk were brought to justice. So they didn't need to sort of have a big disruption. It was more of a peaceful disruption, so to speak.
Well, I'm not asking for violence. I'm not talking about disruption as being something that is, I believe in nonviolent approaches to social change. I used to teach nonviolence in both my civil rights movement days and later in anti-war and days as well. I was an activist for many years. I think it is the best approach to social activism. But I don't think the Me Too movement, or the people who were very concerned about Harvey Weinstein, would say it all happened just in a nice, sweet way with people telling their stories. Storytelling is very important, but it is not something that is going to happen without people demanding change. And people have been demanding it, and they've been finding different ways of expressing that demand. People violated their signed agreements, contractual agreements in the Harvey Weinstein situation to bring it to the fore. Zelda Perkins, who I think you know who she is, for example, but not only her. Those are examples of disruption. And I think in any movement for change, you will find that there is coming together and trying to understand each other and find solutions. But there is also an effort of politically doing it, building social movements to do it, building unions to do it. We're not just going to deal with the environmental problems that deal with us just by coming together. And we've had and being convivial or speaking nicely. We've had one conclave after another trying to deal with it, and it's not enough. It really takes a movement to demand it, and that movement can take many different forms.
What are some of those forms?
Well, one is what we think of as mass popular demonstrations. Another is, an example is stockholders' actions within corporations and holding corporations to account. Sometimes it might mean saying we will organize boycotts of companies that don't really follow through on their commitments to have more eco-friendly policies. In fact, there is a number of places where we've come up with over 190 different variations, some of which are discussed in the book, about what nonviolent social action can look like.
The protest in Ottawa, except for I'll deal with the Ottawa one, except for the days when the truckers wouldn't stop honking, and that had to be sorted out. There was not violence, but how differently do you think that might have turned out had the Prime Minister actually had a discussion with the truckers? Because, I mean, they were legitimately, they were allowed to demonstrate. And as you say, sometimes that's what it takes.
I certainly can't speculate. I have no idea how it might have been different. I have a suspicion.
But isn't it more important to have that discussion, that dialogue?
At the right time. I have the suspicion a premature effort to do that with the truckers wouldn't have been in the truckers' interest and probably wouldn't have been in the Prime Minister's interest. I think they were in a very disruptive mood. I believe there were some behind-the-scenes discussions going on, but I don't know that for sure. But I have heard that was probably taking place. And similarly in Windsor, when the bridge was closed, in the Blue Water Bridge, I don't think it probably was the right timing. I still hope there will be discussions, if not with the truckers, who their main aim was to disrupt, I think, but
That's
at least with people who represent the concerns that they articulated.
Because according to the people involved, that wasn't, they wanted the Prime Minister to come and talk to them and listen to them. And so there seemed to be a breakdown of that negotiation.
It could well be. And I'm not going to play an expert on what I don't really know. It might have been that if he came, that would have diffused things. I don't know. Yeah. But I would say, though, I think their movement was very effective in a way, up to a point, because they were nonviolent. They were very disruptive. Some of their disruption was over the edge, like you talk about the honking. We have a friend who lived in an apartment building right above it, and it was really hard. And also with the bridge here, it was effective. It was very disruptive. It ruined, it screwed up a lot of people's lives, including a lot of truckers who didn't support that. But it certainly got their issue in the forefront. I don't agree with a lot of of what their goals were, but nonetheless, look at that as an effort. But what they did not do is make a transition, which is something we talk about in here, from a more chaotic form of disruption to a more strategic form. And that's what has to happen. A lot of movements have started with people being really angry about something like George Floyd's murder. And going on the streets and demanding, and things get, problematic around the edges, sometimes very problematic. But what makes for change happen then is there's a transition that happens. And you can look at almost any major important successful social movement, like unionism, for example, and it becomes more organized with clear leadership, more discipline, and becomes more sustainable. But if you just have that, you don't have the energy of the spontaneity and the emotionality of it, then those things can often become part of the establishment and part of the system that keeps things the way they were. And I just think that is a natural process in all societies, that we can we can make a difference with if we understand and do something with.
You, early on in the book, you talk about positions of privilege, and you say we're part of the problem. What do you mean?
That we're part of the problem?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I was talking about us being part of the problem, I was talking about people who are specifically trying to intervene to make the conflict better. Now, if you take a neutral approach to whatever people mean by that, but we're not going to recognize major power differences, where there are people struggling against each other, then, and where there is a big power differential, then almost always you're in effect of siding on the side of the more powerful. If you don't do anything to make sure that the less powerful sides get heard and get empowered, then it is the more powerful sides that prevail. And let me give you an example. I think many times environmentalists are asked to participate in roundtables to deal with local concerns, like putting in a toxic facility or a landfill, for example. And what happens often is that they're suddenly talking about how to make it work. And that actually, and I've heard many environmentalists say, it takes us away from the energy we need to build a movement for more profound change, and ends up tinkering about how we can keep things the same. There are certainly many other examples of where, when people come together, if it is simply about let's talk and be nice and understand each other, that usually works in favor of the more powerful, the group that is stands to benefit from maintaining the status quo.
It seems today that small groups have a very large voice, larger than perhaps at most times in history. And in the book you talk about cancel culture. Public shaming was reviled, and we got rid of it. What do you think about cancel culture? Do you think that sort of public shaming is appropriate today?
I think it's gotten out of hand sometimes, but I'll tell you, where it's gotten out of hand, at least in the United States, I'm a dual citizen, is much more on the right. The cancel culture of anybody, for example, within the Republican Party, who said they do think Joseph Biden won the election. Now they're all people who have said that and who voted to support it are all fighting for their political lives because they said it and are being booed at meetings and conferences. And there's all sorts of other examples of that. I think it's on both sides. I mean, I think sometimes the better thing to do is to debate and to talk and et cetera. But I think the accusations about cancel culture against the more progressive forces, as I see it, are a little overblown. I'm not saying it hasn't gotten out of hand at times.
Yeah,
but
because they've done some.
Yeah, I think it's gotten overblown too. I mean, if you're a black student on campus and you hear casual statements about let us understand where racists or where the slave owners came from, and they don't understand what that's like for you, and you get angry and you say that's not okay and we don't want to have to listen to that. Understand that that's not, understand where that's coming from before we just condemn it and say that's not okay, as one example.
Bernie, tell me about what you called the 3 essential features of meaningful dialogue.
So I think we often think that dialogue is just sitting down nicely and listening to each other. It's not what meaningful dialogue is about. Meaningful dialogue is about addressing our most difficult issues in a constructive way. And at least 3 things help that. One is naming what the real problem is. If the real problem is somebody feels someone else is being racist, for example, finding a way of naming it. Secondly, we have to tell stories. We can relate across our differences if we're willing to listen to each other's stories. And if we can tell our stories of what we've experienced, for example, if we are subject to oppression, and we can listen to someone else's story who feels what it's like for them to get into the position they got into, that they feel that they're being maybe misunderstood by what they were saying. And the third thing is being aware of the power differentials and power dynamics. Because it's easy to say, let's have dialogue with somebody I have power over. But it's much harder if they have a lot of power over me and they're misusing it. So those, I think, are 3 essential features. There are a lot of other skills and tactics that can help make dialogue work. But without that, really meaningful conversation about really meaningful issues does not occur.
Looking ahead, what change would you like to see
in the world?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we are not going to be able to deal with our fundamental problems if we don't find better ways of building sustained social movements behind what we say we need. And I would like to see more and more of people commit themselves to being strategic and skillful in building movements about, let's say climate change. And at the same time become more skilled in learning how to talk to people they disagree with. I think both of those things are necessary. And I think those of us who have been through the mill on both ends of it, maybe we have a role to play in helping that. So that's what I hope.
Thank you so much.
Well,
really appreciate this.
Well, thank you so much, too. I appreciate it as well.
Well, that's all for this episode of Scribes and Songsters. Many thanks to our guest, Bernie Mayer. Thanks to our Scribes and Songsters team, producer Liz Pettipies-Phillips, technical producer and editor Gary Glass, social media manager Michel Fortier, and consultant Brian Sweet. Grateful thanks to Tony Toldo and the Toldo Foundation, and to Neil and Tina Queering for their support. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you soon right back here on Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandel. Bye for now.